Welcome to The Right Focus, a podcast for writers, newbies, and veterans, and everyone in between. We're hosted by Emma Lee with the assistance of Remy Black and Edie Rooms, all from Writers Inc. Books. Our focus is productivity, process, craft, and tools. Each episode lasts as long as it takes to fix a quick dinner, drive a short commute, or take a brisk walk. Resources and links are in the show notes. Visit us at therightfocus.blogspot.com. Now, on to this week's episode.
How's that?
Yay!
Isn't it wonderful when the technology works just like you wanted it to?
From the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, how are you doing this afternoon?
How are you?
I'm harassed. I'm trying to do 15 different things at once and it's not working out.
Oh, no, I hate that. I don't know. It just seems crazy lately. There's so much going on and everything's in a panic and I can't get my light right, but that's okay.
Okay. Things will slow down and I think I've got a handle on it. It's going to work. Everything's great. I see the next 3 days and I'm going like, I can handle this. And then the next morning, something happens and disrupts my whole schedule. And I feel like pulling my hair out for the next 3 days. And just, oh my goodness.
I open up the calendar at the beginning of the week and there's large chunks of time that are gone. And even if it's little time, even if it's something like going to get my eyes tested, it's still a chunk in the middle of the day that kind of eats the day.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And you think, okay, it'll just take me a few minutes to drive over there and back. But then you realize you've spent an hour on the road just getting there because of the traffic. And you think it's going to be another hour. This appointment was 30 minutes, but my whole afternoon is gone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the whole week is gone and then the whole month is gone.
I looked around the other day and I realized, wait, we're not in August.
Actually, now starting to get worried about the holidays. It's like, how did this happen? I'm thinking I've got all the time in the world. And no, I don't.
It goes away. It goes away.
Yeah.
And I try to do so well by planning. Yeah. And then my plan gets disrupted. So I replan. And then that plan gets disrupted. Oh, well.
And then
it's just horrible.
In the middle of all of this, we're still trying to write.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm supposed to get 500 words. You would think 500 words would be easy. Well, I'm not getting 500 words today, not unless I get them at like 10 o'clock, because I still have things after this. But I have gotten research done. I have answered some crucial questions because I could do those in snippets.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not that we're not getting stuff done. It's just that we're not getting to the heart of the stuff we want to get done. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. We've started talking.
That's okay. And you wanted me to remind you to record.
The recording is going. Okay. Thank you so much for reminding me, donalee. I'm Emily Dunn. I sometimes go by M.A. Lee, which is my pen name. I started The Right Focus in the COVID year because I kept thinking that I needed to do something. And after about 6 months, I said, okay, you've kicked yourself around this enough. It's time to start. And so I've just been doing this and doing that and doing this and doing that. But I have tried to have a weekly Wednesday episode of information for writers. And I thought about this series and I thought we would do some kind of technology thing, whether I call technology paper and pen. That's
my favorite.
Yes, exactly. So please introduce yourself and then tell us what you're doing as writing, and then talk about technology that you use on a daily basis or a constant basis whenever you're writing.
Great. Well, hi, and thank you for having me. I'm Donalee Moulton, and I am a professional writer based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So
I love Halifax.
well, you know what? We had the first flakes of snow today. Yes.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, not the word I used, Emily, but that's okay. My background is in journalism. So for many years, I was a freelance journalist. So I was very used to writing about medicine one day, the law the next day, children's issues the next day, and everything, of course, to deadline. But several years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago now, I wrote my first mystery set in Nova Scotia, and a traditional murder mystery. And I followed that up with a historical mystery, not normally my thing, but it was by an invitation from my publisher. So Conflagration is the historical mystery, and Hung Out to Die is the traditional mystery. And next year I will have 2 mysteries coming out, a new series, 3 women meet in a yoga studio and mayhem ensues. So Bind will be out in March and Melt will be out in June.
Tell me again the name of the first book you mentioned.
Hung Out to Die.
Hung Out to Die. Ooh, I love that. And this episode should air toward the end of February. So that will be right before your book comes out.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. That would be great.
Okay. Now, how do you use technology in your writing?
So I am a midstream user of technology, right? I know enough to be efficient and effective, especially when it comes to things like Microsoft Word and all the attachments that I need to make the writing flow easily, or to create the infamous PowerPoints or whatever else it is that I need. I have enough of a sense of what's happening in the technology world, primarily because I have a good friend who is fully immersed in that world. So drags me kicking and screaming into it. AI, of course, being the big thing right now, which is both thrilling and terrifying.
Yes.
But that said, when we first started talking back and forth, I realized that the technology that I use, because I'm not thrilled with the technology, my friend who drags me kicking and screaming, he could think, eat, talk technology all day long, right? From how you plug it in to how it explodes the universe. For me, it's a tool.
Yeah.
And so I want to be proficient in the tool or the tools, because that saves me time and frustration. But it's much the same as I would rather eat cereal with a spoon, because it's simply easier than eating it with your fingers, right?
Yeah.
But what I discovered when I wrote Hung Out to Die was that there are situations that your characters get into that require you to understand bits of technology that you otherwise take for granted. So my main character in Hung Out to Die is a CEO of a cannabis corporation, and his name is Rial Brava. And he shows up for work one morning, as he does every morning, and he puts up his card to the security reader and nothing happens. And so all of a sudden, I have to figure out, well, how do they work? How could you disconnect them? Do you clip a wire? Do you have to hack into software? Like, how is all of this done? And can you do it from the card, or does it have to be done from the reader? And I found throughout that book, there were situations like that came up repeatedly that required me to delve into areas of technology that I wouldn't normally. And part of that issue is always, do I actually understand it? Because it's not my world, and it's literally a very technical world. But then, of course, there's the dilemma of, how do I explain it to a reader so that it sounds authentic, but doesn't sound complicated or boring? And I found that very challenging. One, probably because in part it does bore me. I really don't care how the little card is read. I just want to put the card up, it turns green, and I go in. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I came up against a number of those kinds of situations, and there were people who helped walk me through it, and there were images that I can look at to see how things would work. And in my background as a journalist, I had also been, because cannabis is legal in Canada, I believe we were the second country in the world to legalize it fully. And as a journalist, I had been invited to the opening of cannabis corporations where they will actually produce the plants. Now, there's no plants in them because that's illegal, but you got to see the structure and the facility and the security. So I had some background in things like that, which helped immensely. But I know that when I went into it, there is this, especially if we're not 20, especially if we didn't grow up with this, and especially if we don't, just kind of draw it in and relish it. There's this sense that, oh, I'm not going to get it right, or this is going to be difficult, or how do I do this? And so I found, in large part, I had to understand this new technology to me, but I also had to overcome the mental kind of stuff that said, oh, you're not going to be good at this. Oh, this is going to be complicated.
Right.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering if, oh, you go ahead.
No, I just was saying, I totally get what you're talking about.
Isn't it? Because if I were investigating poisons, I wouldn't hesitate for a minute. I'd feel very comfortable. I've never poisoned anyone. Perhaps we should put that right out there so the world knows I've never poisoned anyone. But we murder people in all kinds of ways, and we don't tend to shy away from those. So if we have to know, can you really fire a ice bullet from a gun, right? We don't shy away from those kinds of things. But when we get into the technologies, especially when it involves software and how software is connected to hardware and what can upset that delicate balance, there's this hesitation that we don't have the qualifications or the insight or the expertise because it's not the world that we grew up in, because we're not 12, right?
Right. Right. And when we're thinking about, well, I remember the advent of email and sending attachments and taking photographs and sending them in your email. And I hesitated for months about that, thinking it was going to be difficult. And it was so easy. I couldn't believe how easy it was. And I think we often think that when we encounter something new, especially with technology, because the inner workings aren't there. I grew up with a typewriter that you could open the lid and you could unjam the keys and then you could continue typing. And now when I have a trouble on Microsoft Word, I'm going like, why is this happening? I can't open the machine up and fix it.
I am just getting a little note here that my battery is low. I don't know why, because it's been plugged in all day, but I still have 58 minutes. So I think we're still good, even though it's low.
Good.
So what that means is whatever I had it plugged into was not powering it up, right?
Which is an example of technology problems.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm like you. It reminds me very much of my car. So I go in, take my car into the garage, and the mechanic says it's the carburetor. Well, I don't know what a carburetor is. I don't care what a carburetor is. I have a sense that I need one for the car to run. But how much is it going to cost me to fix the carburetor, and how long is it going to take? And so I'm content to not know the inner workings of some of these things. But when you're writing about something and it's inherent in the murder plot or the crime plot, you have to be sure that what you're giving out holds up under scrutiny.
Yeah.
Right. So I probably could have glossed over how the security system had been disabled and just said the security system was disabled, but that doesn't ring true. People want to know, well, how does that happen in this day and age, especially after I've set it up that something like a cannabis corporation, which is heavily regulated by the government, has to have top-notch security. So though there were issues like that came up all the time. The flip side happened for me, interestingly enough, with my second book, which is Conflagration, and it's a historical mystery. and it's set in 1734 and in Montreal, and an enslaved Black woman is accused of setting the lower town of Montreal on fire, and every building in the lower town was burned to the ground. But there were things that you don't even think about. That's the flip side of technology. How do they live when they don't have any? So I had my character get up one day, and he's thinking about something, and he goes over and he makes a cup of coffee. And I think, whoa, wait a minute. Did they drink coffee in 1734? Yes, they did. But then you think, how did they make it? Because they didn't have stoves and they didn't have microwaves. And I mean, at best they had a fireplace, right? So did you shove it in? It's things like, it's the absence of technology that was equally confounding to me as much as the advent of technology.
And then there are things that you don't think about. I remember going to a seminar, and we were looking at a story that a girl had written, and she was in North Carolina having her coffee on the back porch as the sun was rising. And she received a phone call from her parents, who were in California, and they had just finished brunch. She hadn't even thought about that time, that the time had changed so much because it wasn't part of her everyday life. So she didn't think about the fact that they would be way far behind her and they would not be having brunch. So there are all sorts of things that we don't think about because we don't live with those.
And there are also there's all sorts of things, as we were just saying, that we don't think about how they work. We just take them for granted. And I find it a delicate balance. I read a lot of thrillers, and a lot of them have technology as an inherent component to the plot. And I sometimes find that I get mired in the detail, and I've lost the energy and excitement for the story. And so I find that a challenge as a writer to give enough information that you sound knowledgeable and credible, but you're not giving so much information that the detail is slowing the writing down.
Right. And you're going to lose your reader if their eyes just glaze over because you've got so much information coming at them. How much do they need for the story without giving away maybe an essential clue, but telling them enough that they'll stay engaged and remember what they've read 50 pages from now when it might be essential for them to know.
And that's an interesting point, because at one point in Hung Out to Die, I referenced the telephone system, because this is it would be a small company, but they would have numerous employees, and they have a central phone system that they can all access. And so the question was, does that phone system record? And if it does record, how long does it record for? And then you find yourself going down the rabbit hole of the 8,000 different phone systems that are out there, right? Some of which do record and some of which don't, and some of which are sold in Canada and some of which aren't, because that's my other dilemma, that I'm selling to readers in this country and in the United States. So I found I had to weigh what was critical to the story. So being able to get in and out of the building securely was critical to the story. Was the phone system critical to the story?
Right.
So I determined that it was not critical. So I had my character say it, and then when questioned by the detective, I just had him say, I made that up.
That's a good way to handle that.
And very true for many of us, because many of us, we use a phone to make a call, within the organization or outside the organization. But it's like a microwave. I use the microwave to heat something up. I'm not cooking a roast in the microwave. There are brilliant people who are doing it. I'm not one of them. So for those of us who are using 10% of what the technology will let us do, we just guess at the other 90% that it can do.
Right. Okay. What other technology do you find helpful? Like the Sisters in Crime has this pacemaker thing that sets your word count. If you can put your word count at the tail end of the month, and it will tell you how many words you need to write per day to get to that total that you want. Do you use anything like that on a regular basis?
I have tried them, and what I find is for me, and I don't know if this is true for you, but I find that the technology can end up taking more energy than I want to devote
Mm-hmm.
to it. So I don't use a plotting system. I tend to use my basic outline system, right? Nothing fancy. I don't use a plotting system. I've tried them and they're very good at finding the inconsistencies, but they're also, then it becomes about plugging the information into the system and seeing what the system is telling me, right? It reminds me in some ways much like a grammar check. I have it on, but I've learned in large part to ignore it until I'm proofreading, because otherwise I'm continuously distracted by this when I need to be over here writing and thinking more broadly, right?
Right.
So I one of the ones who tries the new technologies, but I always do it with a great deal of hesitation because I don't want to get sucked into the vacuum of the technology dictating what I do, when I do it, and how I do it. And,
Mm-hmm.
and since I feel that that has happened to me, I'm now an even more reluctant adopter of
Right.
technologies, unless obviously um, there are efficiencies to it. So I
Mm-hmm.
am quite enthralled with Google Docs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
because they allow the whole editing process to be so efficient and so easy. And no one is using track changes and all of those kinds of things, which are time consuming, and not everybody has the right version of Adobe. So if it's something that I can do naturally and easily, I don't tend to go looking for a technology to help me. If it's something that's going to make life easier, then I'm very willing to try it. And I know the adopters of technology will tell us that it all makes it easier, right? But it makes it easier when you're really comfortable with it and it's the way you think. For
Mm-hmm.
me, the technology is the add-on. It's not the natural default of my thinking, right? So if I'm thinking about a plot, I need to think about it. I need to go in and have a great big giant bubble bath with, candles and
Mm-hmm.
aromatherapy.
Right.
I don't want to sit in front of a screen and type in possibility. I just want it to be more organic for
Mm-hmm.
me. And the beauty of that is that it works without it taking you twice as long to write a
Right.
book, right? And so I think
Exactly.
for many writers that I talk to, they want to be obviously a good writer, but they also want to be an efficient writer. And so that's where the technology balance comes in for me.
I think sometimes people who are promoting the technology also don't consider the learning curve, um, because you might get a program that can do all sorts of things, but learning just one batch of what it can do for you takes 3 or 4 days that you might not have because you're busy on something else. And so you're constantly weighing, do I have that learning term curve time or not? What else do you find helpful?
Well, the related to your last point, which I think is important, and I've learned it over time. I've spent a lot of time with software programs trying to understand what the software program can do, much like the microwave. And what I've discovered is that somebody will say, or I will discover that, a software program that I have perhaps to outline a book for me will do these amazing, fabulous things. And I think, yes. And then I realize that I'm probably only going to do that once or twice a year, which means that every time I go to do it, I'm going to have forgotten how I did it 6 months ago or 3 months ago or even 4 weeks ago. So now I'm back to the learning curve again. It might
Mm-hmm.
be a slightly shorter learning curve, but it's still going to be a learning curve. So if I'm not kind of prepared to be using the technology on a regular basis, I know that the frustration level will reduce somewhat, but it won't come down to here, which is where I'd
Right.
really like it to be.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add about technology?
And for me, because my friend who drags me in kicking and screaming into technology, his big thing is AI now. So everything is referenced in
Mhm.
terms of AI. But he was telling me something the other day about a program he thought would be helpful for me for recording information, earlier versions, without it having to open every version and to read
Right.
every version, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. But what I've said to him and what I've come to learn is that it's like most things that we do as writers, it's what is going to be the most natural to us, what's going to feel the most comfortable to us. And I'm not going to kind of force the round peg into the square simply because I know I ultimately can. And so I've come to accept that if I'm not on the cutting edge, that's okay, because I'm not in the dark ages either.
Right. Right. Tell me about your writing journey, how you made the transition from journalism, which is the nonfiction world, it's all fact-based, to moving into fiction, where your imagination can just go wild and crazy, which I love.
When I was when I was younger, when I was in university, I wrote poetry and short
Mhm.
stories. And then, of course, life comes along and you get a job and you get working and you're busy. And so all of that went to the back burner. But I think somewhere it was always there that I wanted to do fiction.
Mhm.
And I knew enough to know that fiction wasn't going to fit in around the edges of my life. So you had to make a commitment to it. And so
Mhm.
my story is always that I'm in the bathtub one night and I'm saying, I really need to start that novel, right? Like now is the time. And this little voice said, "Oh, donalee, either start the book or shut up about it. But, we're tired of hearing you talk about the book." So if my inner voice was tired of hearing about it, I figured that was it. And what I discovered was, you raise an interesting point, because in nonfiction and journalism, there is a very usually straightforward path from beginning to middle to end. There's a
Mhm.
set number of words. There's very little deviation or side trips. Of course, in a mystery novel, you want the side trips and the deviation, right? You want to lead people astray. You want to go down paths that are irrelevant. And so my first draft was very um, sparse and to the point. And one of my beta readers took a look at it and said, "Yes, looks like a journalist wrote it." So I had to learn to write unlike a journalist. So keeping all the
Right.
good things about learning how to be concise and learning how to take complex information and make it understandable. But I also had to relax and say, no, I don't have to do that in 3 sentences. I can take 3 paragraphs to do that if I want. Yeah, that
Right.
was that was new to me and a little uncomfortable at the beginning.
When I started writing, I was still involved in my teaching career, and I had learned to present information to my students. Here's the information. Here's what you need to do with the information. Here's how you do that with the information. And here is an example of how to do it. And I tried to apply that to my writing of fiction. That doesn't work.
Yes.
That definitely does not work.
There are also things I found, because one assumes that if you're a big mystery reader, you
Mhm.
understand what it takes to write one. And you need to be a big reader of mysteries, I think, to be a writer of mysteries.
Yeah.
But that's just a baby step towards writing one. And I remember when I wrote the first page to my book that's coming out next year. And an editor looked at it and said to me, yeah, it's clean, but you know what? There's no tension, right? So even though you're setting the scene, you have to give us a little something that's going to make it a little tense. And I thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I enjoy that when I read mysteries, but I missed it here. So I went back and put it in. And I did the same thing with Hung Out to Die. The main character in Hung Out to Die is a psychopath, but not the nasty kind. There's no blood or guts or violence. And I tried to hold off letting readers know that until they were several pages in. And my publisher said, oh, for heaven's sakes, tell us up front so we know what we're getting into. So there's a little tiny prologue. I think it's 2 sentences now that says 4 to 12% of CEOs are psychopaths. I am one of them. But it was just just set the scene for what's, and so those were techniques that I had to learn. I had been reading them for, decades and marveling at them and loving them. But when it comes to writing them, sometimes you forget them or you think they're there until it's pointed out that they're not.
Right, exactly. You have all these tools that the subconscious part of your brain has absorbed, but you haven't thought about applying them and haven't actually applied them to the story. I see that.
And it's, I think, as all writers know, there are things that you become very attached to as the writer. And that's not something I think that happens in journalism, because in journalism, stories are assigned. So stories are assigned to you that you would never otherwise cover. Right. I did a story once on survival suits. So that if your helicopter crashes, how do you survive in the North Atlantic in freezing temperatures? Well, you have a survival suit. I would never have covered that story if it hadn't been assigned. So I'm writing a story about survival suits and how they work and what the law says and who's using them. But I have no particular attachment to this story. And I know that once I've written it, it will go to an editor who will edit it very thoroughly and very wonderfully. So I found that when I went to fiction, I did develop attachments to things. They might have been a sentence, they might have been a description, they might have been a clue, right? And some of those attachments I was willing to let go of in the editing process, and some of those attachments I wasn't. In same ways that there are ways that characters behave, and sometimes someone will say, well, I don't know that the character would have done that, and you think, oh yes, they would have. And we hold on, don't we? And I'm trying to learn to hold on to what's important and recognize when something is time to let it go.
Yes.
There is, I will share this with you, there is a scene in Hung Out to Die. My main character is a psychopath, which means he doesn't react the way that everybody else reacts. And he knows that. He knows he's different, and he understands that what would make people cry, he just shrugs his shoulders and moves on. So there's been a death. An employee has died. He's the CEO. He has responsibilities to reach out to the family. And he realizes that he doesn't know much about this family. So his HR director comes in and she's giving him some information. And he says, does the man who died have any family? And she says, yes, he does. He has a son, Bran. And the CEO looks up and says, like the muffin? And she says, no, like Game of Thrones. And so when he goes to see the family that night, and everybody, the family and friends are seated in the living room, and there's a young boy there, probably 12 years old. And he says to himself, that's the son. That must be Muffin. No, Bran. And every time I read that line, I laughed. I thought it was great. It was cute. It was clever. Yeah. And you read it when you write it, and you read it when you kind of editing, and then when you get the comments back. And I'm at my desk and I'm doing this, and Cheryl, who works with me in the office, I'm laughing, and she looks at me and she says, you're reading the Bran line again, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. She said, yeah, it's not that funny.
I think it's funny.
I did too, right? But this is what the kind of thing that happens to you. Maybe I'd be curious to know if it happens to somebody who's written numerous books. But I found the attachment thing was something I had not expected, and had to learn when it was appropriate and when it was time to say goodbye.
Right. I see that. Okay, according to my timer, we have less than a minute to go. Your computer is going light and dark and light and dark. So it may be going to die on you. Zoom does consume a lot of power.
It should not be. I mean, my computer is plugged in all the time, so I don't know why it's low or not, but that'll be the technology issue I grapple with tonight.
Okay, Donalee Moulton, Hung Out to Dry, coming out in March. Where can we find it?
The easiest place is probably Amazon, because we can find the world on Amazon. The publisher is BWL Publishing out of Alberta. You can certainly find it there. And my website is donaleemoulton.com, which will take you to all of the links.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
And stay warm.
Yes, the snow is coming.
Thanks for listening to The Write Focus, a podcast for writers at all levels, hosted by Emma Lee from Writers Inc. Books, assisted by Remy Black and Edie Runes. Our focus is productivity, process, craft, and tools. Music is licensed through Audio Jungle, called Background Music Loop. Its creator is Alexander Polishchuk, known on Audio Jungle as Plastic 3. The music comes in different iterations. Show notes and resource links for this and other episodes can be found at thewritefocus.blogspot.com. Write to us at winkbooks@aol.com when you have questions, comments, and speculations. We will try to answer you as quickly as possible. By the way, we will not mind your email address. That's rude. If you find value in our content, share with your writing friends or write a review. We're small beans here without the advertising budget of the big peeps, and you can make a difference. And whatever occurs, write on.